It's time for the Full Press Hockey Podcast with Jim Biringer and Bruce Zeman.
Shoots! He scores!
And now, with a trip around the National Hockey League, here's Jim and Bruce.
Everyone, welcome back to the Full Press NHL Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Biringer, voice of Full Press Hockey. I am joined by a special guest today, Jared Book, of the Deputy Manager of Habs on the Prize. Jared, thank you for doing this today.
Thanks for having me.
Big news coming out of Montreal this week. We thought the dog days of August were here, but all of a sudden we have a trade to announce, and Patrik Laine is going to Montreal. Your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was surprised that it actually happened with Laine specifically, just because I thought that was maybe not an option they would have gone through. I thought personally it was a perfect fit for them, so I thought it made sense. But you know how it is sometimes when things make sense, they don't always work out that way, or it's not actually realistic in that sense. So I think a little bit of surprise. Obviously, it came out of nowhere. Which is the Elliot Friedman tweet came out, and then you're like, oh, okay, when he says something like that, it usually comes out within the hour, so it got us on our horse pretty quickly. But once it happened, it made all the sense in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great addition for the Montreal Canadiens. I mean, a team that was near the bottom of the league in scoring last year. I believe they averaged 2.83 goals per game last year. And to add a top six forward with a guy that potentially can score 40 goals, that's huge for a team like this.
Yeah, I mean, it fits in perfectly with what they're looking to add. I mean, you look at what they're lacking, what they need. They needed scoring, right? That's what they need. If you look at the names that they were linked to, whether it was Laine or, we heard about Trevor Zegras when rumors started about him being on the block in Anaheim. Those are the guys that make sense. You don't really care about their defense and when you're looking to add what the Montreal Canadiens are looking to add. That's what you have guys like Nick Suzuki for. That's what you have other players for. You just need someone to put the puck in net. Yes, they have Cole Caulfield, but it's really hard for one player to do it all and be expected to shoot all the time, and he's added other parts to his game as well. So it's really something that really just fit in. The age-wise, he fits in. He's only 26. It feels like he's been around for a while because, well, he has. I mean, he's been playing in the NHL since he's 18 years old. So it kind of feels like he's gone through a couple of careers and he's like a grizzled veteran. But he's only 26, so he fits in age-wise with this group as well. I just think it's a perfect mix and a gamble that Kent Hughes has proven that he likes to do. It brings you back to that Kirby Dach trade, right? Another top 3 pick who was out of favor with the team he was on and available for probably less than what market value would indicate that he should be. Obviously, the price tag is a little bit different on the salary side of things, but so was the acquisition cost. It didn't cost them a mid-first round pick. It didn't cost them, an Alexander Romanov. It cost them, I guess it's similar to Alexander Romanov and Jordan Harris, but it just makes sense from a perspective of what the Canadiens are looking for, where they are in the rebuild, and what Laine can bring to the table.
Yeah, and Laine, too, can score on a power play, and we know the Canadiens' power play has not been that great over the last couple of years. I'm trying to be as nice as possible by saying it, but no, look, you know what snipers can do in Montreal. I mean, I think about the days of Alexei Kovalev there, how he was beloved, Ilya Kovalchuk too, when he was up there as well. I mean, they just embrace these guys. And from all indications, Laine is excited to go to Montreal.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. And what you're seeing around the league is that people understand and can see what's happening in Montreal. You hear players who leave Montreal talk about it. You hear players who aren't even in Montreal talk about it. Like, people can see what's going on in Montreal, whether it's Martin St. Louis, whether it's the up and coming young players that they have and they're surrounding their core with. It's something that I think any player in the NHL would be excited to come to. I think Laine, like I said, he fits in age-wise. He's not going to a group where he's going to be much older or much younger than anybody else. and he's coming in to kind of just fill a need. He's not being asked to be the leading scorer. He's not asked to be the captain. He's being asked to be a top six goal scorer. And whether that's, 30 goals or 25 or what he said 40 or 50, I mean that's he's not coming in with the expectation he has to score 50. And I think that ever since he did that in Winnipeg, that's kind of the expectation of him. That was the expectation when he was acquired by Columbus. And sometimes things just don't work out. But I think he's getting a surrounding cast that is well equipped for him. And you mentioned the power play. I mean, the Montreal Canadiens are going from just a couple years ago where they couldn't buy a power play goal to having Mike Matheson as a 60-point scorer, maybe even Lane Hudson on the second unit. Kirby Dach and Alex Newhook are probably now going to be on the second unit of the power play, which is just kind of an embarrassment of riches for a team that isn't really expected to be a playoff team. They have a lot of really interesting pieces that are coming together nicely, and for the first time in a while, well, especially since the Bergevin era, there's a plan. That's why the Laine trade made so much sense, is because you can see what Kent Hughes was saying and what he was trying to do. And he's like, I'm going to try and add somebody who fits in with this group, not going to sacrifice the future too much. And that just screamed Patrik Laine. And it's comforting. And I'm not sure how fans of other teams feel about their GMs or things like that, but it's comforting to know that there's something that makes sense and that they actually go out and do it. And I think that's kind of the prevailing thought about it. I think a lot of fans are just in shock. You mentioned the dog days of August. This is something that the Canadiens were expected to make a splash this offseason. Like everyone was saying, you look at the cap space, you look at the young players that they have, the stockpile of defense, the need at forward, the very real need at forward, the collection of draft picks that they have. It was always a matter of time of when they were going to add something. And when the first day of the draft went without any trades, no Laine trade, no Zegras trade, Martin Necas in Carolina was then unsigned and rumored to be on the block as well. Once none of those guys moved, you kind of felt, okay, the Canadiens are in play for these guys, because other teams can dangle like a mid-first round pick. You knew that Montreal was not going to dangle that number 5 overall pick. So it kind of became obvious that they were still in play for something. It just took until, the second half of August for it to actually happen. So the timing may have been a surprise more than making a move, because I think they were widely regarded to be making a move.
Yeah, you mentioned it before, though, the plan in Montreal. And that's why I've been like so on this bandwagon, because I saw this plan in New York with Jeff Gordon when what he was doing with the Rangers. And the timeline is like similar to when they signed Artemi Panarin and they were ready to go. Even though I don't think they got in because of the bubble and everything. And then he got let go and he's come to Montreal, and Jeff Gordon and Kent Hughes have done an amazing job, similar to what Tom Fitzgerald's done in New Jersey, understanding we can grab these players with, the age bracket. And again, like you said, they're supposed to make a splash this year. This feels like this is the third offseason now that they've done something big. Monahan, obviously, and Kirby Dach, and now Patrik Laine. And yeah, it's 2 years at $8.75 million. But okay, if it works, great. If it doesn't, maybe you can get something for him down the line again, like you did with Monahan. And I'm just so impressed with what the Montreal Canadiens have done and the patience everybody is showing up there, because Montreal is that city where, like, we got to win. We got to win. I think for the first time, there's not a lot of pressure on this team, and that's why it makes sense for Laine to be there.
Yeah, it's kind of funny about the patience thing, because one of the most negative, and I use air quotes there because it's not really negative. It's kind of like is fans saying, that means we're not going to pick top 5 again this year. Like they're making moves to try and be better on the ice, and it's like, well, yeah, that's what you have to do at a certain point. And so you mentioned patience. I think some fans are somehow still happy losing, and I don't think fans will be upset if they miss the playoffs this year. But I think at a certain point, and this is where they are now, the games have to start to matter. March and April, they have to have important games. They have to be in the conversation, because it becomes a very fine line between taking the next step in the rebuild and becoming, the Buffalo Sabres of, even now, but they're better now. But the Eichel Sabres, where they were perpetually, next year's going to be the year, next year's going to be the year, and they just never had the results. Ottawa is getting into that territory now, I think, as well, where the players are getting older, but the success on the ice is not coming. And so there's a fine line between taking the next step in the rebuild and perpetually being in a rebuild. And I think that the Canadians are in that spot right now. They're entering the last year of the Slavkovsky entry level contract, the last year of the Goulet entry level contract. They're going to have to start to win games. And the Laine contract, I was a little concerned about it. I didn't know what the numbers looked like beforehand, but then when I actually crunched the numbers with the Price LTIR, they still have like almost all of Price's contract that's usable in cap space. So it's still it's a way to weaponize cap space, right? There's a lot of teams in the league that hold on to cap space and are like, oh, maybe something will happen. At a certain point, you have to act on it because cap space doesn't play minutes, they don't score goals, and they don't win games. So weaponizing that cap space is something that he's done. You mentioned the Sean Monahan trade. That was weaponizing cap space and getting a first round pick out of it. Here they weaponize cap space and get an additional second round pick and filling a need for, Jordan Harris is a very good young defender. But the Canadians have a lot of very good young defenders. So that's what trading from a position of strength looks like. You have to give something to get something. And Jordan Harris is going to be very good in Columbus. It wouldn't surprise me if he becomes a top 4 defenseman in the NHL for a very long time. The Canadians have a lot of players that profile to being top 4 defensemen for a very long time. So you have to just make a move. And to me, he always had more value in a trade than he did to the Canadians. That's not to say he didn't have value to the Canadians, but he was never going to pass Caden Goulet. He wasn't going to pass Mike Matheson this year. Is he going to play ahead of guys like Arbor Jack? I don't know. Then you have guys like Lane Hudson as well coming in. Like it's becoming very hard to find all these guys top 4 minutes. And he's a luxury to have on a third pairing, and one they can afford to try and fill a need, which Patrik Laine theoretically fills.
Yeah, and one more thing on Laine, he's had his struggles in Columbus, coaching changes, and glad to see he's back mentally. He's ready to go, and physically, we've seen what the Instagram videos look like and his training. How big is it to have a guy like Martin St. Louis as his head coach? Because we have seen him do wonders with guys like Cole Caulfield, Slavkovsky, Nick Suzuki. The jury's still out on Kirby Dach because Dach hasn't been healthy. But if a healthy Kirby Dach and a healthy Patrik Laine, man, the Canadians have a formidable top 6.
Yeah, I mean that's the big thing is that if they don't even need Patrik Laine to come in and score 40, 50 goals, right? They don't need that. That's not what he's there to do. If he scores 25, 30, I think that's going to be happy. He obviously he's being paid to, an amount that's more than that, but that's not what the Canadians gave him as a contract, right? So I think it's very big. Martin St. Louis, the big knock on him is that a lot of people think that when the team has to, when X's and O's really start to matter, he's going to be out of his depth a little bit. I'm not sure if that's the case. I think that his priority right now is to develop players. That's what his mandate is right now. And the growth that he's shown, and not just him, but the entire organization has really put a focus on player management, player development. And I think that getting the best out of Patrik Laine, surrounding him with a really good culture, which Montreal has, like the vibes are just off the chart on this team. They just get along very well, and I think that that's something that you bring a Patrik Laine into that, and I think it's somewhere where he can thrive. He wasn't. Let's face it. He wasn't in the best environments. Like that Winnipeg team, there's been lots talked about that. Their issues off ice. Columbus was, a mitigated disaster last year, let's be honest, from the coaching change to everything going on there. So I think that, going to a place where he can just kind of fit in is going to help him. And obviously having a coach that, can help him score goals a little bit too. He made Cole Caulfield an all-around player. Cole Caulfield's more than just a scorer now. If he can do that with Patrik Laine, like there's going to be many options for the Canadians, and it's going to be very interesting to see how things develop. But on paper, It looks like there's a path forward that they're in playoff contention. I don't think it's weird of me to say that. I think that if they're not in the same position that Detroit, Buffalo were in last year, I think that it's probably a failure of a season. I'm not saying they have to be in, but they have to be in that conversation, I think, late in the season.
So for you to take that next step, and then because for my projections, I have the Canadiens making the playoffs next year. To me, this is the year where they have to be like fall short by like a couple of points, maybe like 6, 7 points. You're there. You
Yeah.
mentioned it before, playing meaningful games in March and April. Yes, if you fall short, it stinks. Oh, we were so close to making the playoffs. We all want to be there. We all know that environment in Montreal. But I think next year's really the next year that they're supposed to make the playoffs. And if they make it this year, great. But I think that their next step to me is just to come up just a little short, but play those meaningful games.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is still a development year, right? Like Lane Hudson's going to play his first full pro year, whether that's in the NHL or the AHL. That's up in the question. They have a lot of guys who are still, getting into that role. I mean, you want to see Yuri Slafkovsky, take that next step. You want to see Patrik Laine get back to where he goes, and then you look at the year after, like you're mentioning, they're probably going to get Ivan Demidov in the lineup, and that's kind of where the target really starts to escalate because then you're paying these guys a lot of money, right? Like right now, you're paying Suzuki, you're paying Caulfield a lot of money, but when you go into 25, 26, that's when you're paying Slavkovsky a lot of money. You're paying Gouli a lot of money. That's when the clock really starts ticking. But yeah, I don't think the expectation or the pressure is there on them to make the playoffs this year. And I think that, yeah, the real pressure will start next year in 25, 26. And this year is just kind of grow, see what you have, see what pieces are part of that core and which are you can maybe trade more of, and go from there. But it's going to be a really exciting year because there's a lot of young talent that's going to be in Montreal and Laval this year, and it's going to be very interesting to see what they do roster wise, because there's a lot of guys that can go up or down, and a lot of competition for spots. And it's gonna be a lot of fun to see what goes on. But I mean, you're looking at a Laval team that could end up with like Leighton Hudson, Jaden Struble, Logan Mailloux, David Reinbacher to start the year, Owen Beck. Like that's a pretty solid core for an AHL team. I don't think they're all going to be in the NHL, so it's a good time to start watching hockey in Montreal. And let's face it, the fans deserve to have good hockey. It's been a while since pretty much the Stanley Cup run of 2021. That's the last time they had pretty meaningful hockey to watch. And yeah, if the Canadiens are eliminated by December, January, that's a bad season. And I think anybody in the organization will tell you that too. They don't have to make the playoffs, but they have to be, in that, when they show the wild card
Yeah.
graphic, they have to be on that list. They have to be in that ballpark. So I think that's where the expectation is. Look, it's a really hard Atlantic division.
Oh,
When you and it's not going to get any easier either, right?
no.
Because Detroit's getting better, Buffalo's getting better, Ottawa should be better, Montreal's improving. The top three, the top four of Florida, Toronto, Tampa Bay, Boston, how should be looking at the teams behind them, being like, we have to keep winning because otherwise we're going to be in trouble quickly. And it's going to be interesting to see which teams rise out of the mix. And I said last year, before last year, it's looking like one of Buffalo, Detroit, Ottawa, Montreal is going to have to rebuild again before they make the playoffs. Like it's just so tough a division. They're not going to be room for all of them. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. And teams are jostling for position, but I don't think it's out of the question that Montreal goes right into that conversation starting this year, but really 25, 26 is the year.
One more before I let you go. We wrap up everything. Goaltending. Samuel Montembeau's there. Caden Primo. Is there concern that they need to add like a veteran, or are these the guys that they want to see this year, and maybe they go do something next year?
I think that they're happy with the goaltending they have. I think for so many years this team was built around Carey Price, and it's an adjustment to make to not have to be reliant on your goaltender. But I think the team that they're building is a team that doesn't have to be reliant on their goaltender. They're not going to ask their goaltender to have to make 40 saves or not allow more than 2 goals. They're really building a team where they can win 5-4 games or 4-3 games or 6-5 games. So I think that they're okay. They don't really have much invested in there. Like Montembeault, even if they add somebody else that he's making under $4 million, that's 1B money. But I think that they're perfectly happy with that tandem. They have Jacob Fowler in the wings as well. So I don't think there's an expectation to have to add like a big star goaltender. I think that they'll go a route where if they have to add, maybe a veteran presence behind Montembeault or alongside Montembeault, they can. But the days of them paying, 10, $11 million or having a guy like Shesterkin or a guy that you could rely on to play 60 games is kind of not the pattern that teams are facing now anyway. So I don't think it's a concern. I think they're perfectly fine for where they are. But if the goaltending lets them down, then that's a place that they have to improve if they want to take the next step. But for right now, I think it's fine. I think they have faith that Simon Montembeault can be the goaltender that takes them to the playoffs. Maybe not lead them to a cup necessarily, but we've seen goaltenders that don't have the track record of Montembeault lead team to playoffs, or even win Stanley Cups. If you look at Vegas a little bit. So I think that there's question marks, but I think that this is a team that's going to win as a team, as long as the goaltender doesn't cost them games. Like you've seen other teams have that issue. But so I think that, it's fine. And they're building a team that can win with average goaltending. And I think that that's the key. But I mean, yeah, if the goaltending is not average, then they'll have to improve there for sure. But for now, I don't think there's any pressure on that.
Yeah, I did say that was the last one, but I got one bonus question for you. I do this with all my guests that come on. The one burning question facing the Montreal Canadiens this season.
I'm gonna go a little bit maybe outside the box, but can Kirby Dach stay healthy? I think that there's a real need to solidify the center position behind Nick Suzuki. The expectation is that Kirby Dach is that guy, but he's also been hurt. And it's a fine line between a lot of freak accidents, and that's what they are. There are a lot of freak accidents. He goes into the bench the wrong way. Even his wrist issues were because of an injury in a preseason game and a pre-tournament game in the World Juniors. There's a lot of freak accidents, but there's a fine line between a lot of unrelated freak accidents and just being pure injury prone. And if they can get 60, 70 games out of Kirby Dach this season, that'll be a long way into solidifying what this core looks like.
Beautiful. I love the answer because I think that's a big player that they need this year. For Kirby Dach is huge for the Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah.
Jared Book, Deputy Manager of Habs on the Prize. Thank you so much for joining the Full Press NHL podcast today. It's been a great conversation talking about the Montreal Canadiens.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, guys, Full Press Hockey Podcast up on YouTube. Get it iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Take care and enjoy the rest of the offseason.
Barry Trotz, Nashville Predators, making sure you're listening to Full Press Hockey Podcast.